So let's just start with this question. You know, there's filmmakers in the audience. Maybe the burden of archiving their own work is too much, and they would like to be interacting with an institutional archive to store it. How does that conversation begin?
Do you want to start?
Okay, thanks. I guess I'll speak on behalf of the MoMA process. The acquisitions policy is there's a committee. They meet 3 times a year, and there's a board that meets, and the curators present films. So it's really the curators that bring the films to the table. So it's establishing just quickly relationships with the curators at MoMA. They go to film festivals all over the world, all different film festivals. It's having them see their work. And so they present these films to the acquisitions committee, and then they approve them. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what happens. There's some filmmakers we collect very deep in scope with that we want their negatives. I mean, always getting the negatives is a plus. That's if the filmmaker's ready and they can and willing to deposit it. I should just step back and say for any acquisition, it has to be about purchase or a gift to the museum. So it's not an indefinite loan, so you can't keep taking things out and using them. It's really you're gifting it for future preservation, or the museum's purchasing it for future preservation and exhibition. So it's not a repository in that sense, or a storage facility like that. So yes, we do. We don't necessarily take a lot of outtakes. We do for some things in the past, but that's a lot of material to take on, and we're not really, that's not within the collecting mission or scope. So, but definitely prints and preprint material for the finished film.
I am not here representing the entire New York Public Library and its archival collections. We do have archival collections that will take originals and have archival collection mission statements. I am here from the what was the Donnell Film Library. So, yes, I see a lot of nodding heads. Good, that's what I was hoping for. So if you were a filmmaker in New York, independent filmmaker, you most likely spoke to Bill Sloan or Marie Nestis, and we bought your film. Right? And we gave you really good fair price for it, and then you used that and you went ahead and made your distribution release prints, and everyone lived happily ever after. Donnell closed, but the collection has remained impressively intact, both in spirit, physically, and staff-wise. Myself and our principal librarian, David Callahan, we've both worked with the collection now for many, many years. And the way we operated in the 50s is not unlike the way we operate now. So what does that mean for filmmakers? Well, we really believe that the public should have access to your films. We really believe that they are relevant then, and as documentaries, you cannot put an expiration date on it. I can use the Cinda Firestone's Attica. I teach at Pratt. This is on my syllabus. There's no way that you can teach the Vietnam era without showing this film. Right? Or there's a million films that were made in New York that perfectly capture that moment. So we really believe that the materials, the content is very valuable. And we also believe that the experience and the context in which they were made is valuable. So we still provide 16mm prints. You take them home, you show them to your friends, you come and screen them in our screening room. I have a class from Juilliard coming, doing the whole lecture with class in the screening room with one of our films tomorrow. So that's how we operate. We don't take originals. We do preservation. So we go through our collection and we say, oh, this film looks really good. I love this film. Let's call up the filmmaker and see if we can get some A and B rolls and do film-to-film preservation. So we have new prints so that people don't have to be scarred by seeing something that's really red and faded and scratched. But then we're kind of in this weird position. I can't believe no one's called us out on this in the archival world. We'll say, thank you, please give us your A and B rolls. Okay, we're done, bye, here you go. Now go find an archive to deposit them in. And that's where Steve Blakely, I mean, he put the idea in my head, not even consciously, by having a list. Here's the list of the likely archives who will take your originals. So it's like, oh yeah, That is very handy. Maybe we can build on that, and I can co-opt that and use it and help get this material placed instead of kind of losing sleep, because great, I've preserved the film on New 16, but I just sent the originals in a box via FedEx back to the filmmaker, and maybe they're sticking that in the attic and maybe they're not. So that's kind of how we've been operating. Now, as I said, we definitely want to see those originals placed in an archive that'll accept them and put them in long-term storage.
Something Margaret Bodie said in the earlier session that I hope all filmmakers walk away with after these 2 days is really become your own archivist and make all the steps possible to study and learn all the terms, all those euphemisms and words that is kind of a different language right now. Codecs and wrappers and migration. Really be as proactive as you can to do this yourself right now, because that's really what's going to be best for you in the future. And it would be great for you to get your material into an archive, obviously, because of the temperature and humidities. And some archives have digital repositories where there's active migration. But until that happens and until you're actually ready for that, then I would just do as much as you can to do it yourself.
Because institutional archives are only going to be able to take a small percentage of everything we see in the room right now.
Right. People are making a lot of movies right now, and on all different formats and variations of zeros and ones. And so currently for us, we still encourage very much for you to use film and to preserve on film as much as possible. That's really your most stable medium currently. And I know it's very expensive when you think about, shooting something digitally and doing it a digital, intermediate digital or editing process, and then to put it, maybe you might not exhibit it on film, but you can still put it out on some film format for future storage.
Yeah, I don't know that I can advocate for everyone to just start producing on film. I would love to say, think about 16 for your next project. Your upfront costs are going to be more, but your post is going to be less, and you'll have.
You
those
realize
originals.
what you're saying right now? Like, people are thinking like, you are out of your mind.
I thought that, but then I had an NYU film class come to the library last week, and I was like, I'm just going to put this out there, and if anyone's going to laugh at me, at least it'll be like, some 22-year-old kids laughing at me, and they'll think I'm just old and funny. So I was like, anybody here producing their project on film? And they were like, yeah, like I had a hand raised. So it's kind of like, why not? I can't even begin to imagine producing a film digitally for myself. Like I want to make a film. I know how to load the cartridge of Super 8 into my camera, and that's what I'm going to do. I know how to work with the labs. Like, I don't want to do it myself. I want that buy-in from professionals we can collaborate on something together, and I want that end result to sit on a shelf, and if I can't think about it for 25 years, I want to go back to that shelf and be like, no problem, here's my A and B roll, or not even, you don't even have to go to the A and B roll. Here's my internegative, make prints.
To put this into context, this crazy talk that you guys are speaking, talk to us about some of the challenges of digital that you face as archivists.
We currently want 3 things. We want raw files, we want ProRes files, and we want something accessible to view immediately, either a tape or a DCP. So we want those 3 things, and those are 3 things that we would, come in with an acquisition. And that all depends. It's all very complicated because our media conservators ask questions to filmmakers like, what was the camera you worked on? What editing equipment did you use? All that stuff factors into how they decide what you want, because that, what editing equipment, what operating system software, like all these different things factor in. So it's a much more complicated process, and segregating all these materials and making sure you have your backups. Currently we have three location backup, so it's different than just putting it on the shelf in the vault.
Kind of broadly speaking, I think of 3 different eras of materials. You have film materials and many different variations in film. And then you have video materials with many different formats of video. And now we're in this digital age. Let's talk about video for a minute, because a lot of people in this room, myself included, made films on, on high 8, on mini DV, on, have backups on Betacam, and talk to us about what challenges you have and how you're addressing that whole era of videotape technology.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, because I'm currently, right now, someone's been bugging me to come up with a list to migrate, I'll call it, it's a Vault A04 in our preservation center. It's A04 is where all these legacy formats live, and we need to start migrating them all. And 2-inch video, 2-inch quad, 1-inch video, every variation. So that's, and there's fortunately a lot of places that still are able to do that. It's not cheap, but it's just slowly migrating them to these zeros and ones to then in a place to where they will then keep getting migrated every few years. And yes, so
you're not transferring them to film.
No, we're not. Obviously, it's somewhat unrealistic to do that. I'm sure for most of you to put your zeros and ones out on film, but if that's not possible, then you just should really, keep up with your migrating plan, as Margaret mentioned earlier, and other people I'm sure have reiterated. That's the essential. Even someone just earlier asked me, like, what do I do with all my kids' photos and all the videos? I'm like, you have to take responsibility for that and migrate it. That's it.
And this is kind of teasing what our next panel is about, which is about digital migration. But while I've got you here who thinks a lot about this, what is your solution? Like, what if perfect plan? If you had digital video archives of your own work, Katie, what would you be doing with it?
Putting it on drives, hard drives. That and having backups of those hard drives, and migrating them, and plugging that drive in probably every so often to make sure it's still working. But then obviously,
what is every so often?
I mean, for your backup, at least once a year, and then they're saying every 2 to 3 years now. It used to be 3 to 5. Is you really need to check all that and make sure it's compatible with your computer. And extracting it. I'm sure Rufus can talk about this a lot in the next panel. But
make sure to add to your production budget the amount of time it's going to cost you to do all this migration.
Right. So for all this laughter in the room that about putting your work on film, putting a digital work on film. The one thing that we know about film is that if you've got that film print, you could put it in cold storage.
And forget it.
And walk away for 20.
You could, depending on what, even a negative, that they're going to find some way to scan that 10 years from now. But you'll still be able to look it up, put it up to a light, and see what you actually have there. And
you can go from film to whatever. You can't, file away like a 2K file and be like, okay, this is great, and be like, all right, now I need this to be 4K. Like, turn this into 4K. Like, it doesn't work that way. So, I'm going to be like that very like staunch supporter of film and make some crazy statements. But like really, I'm just a lazy archivist. I don't know, maybe that's it. It's nice to know that we have something that can become anything. I can't even imagine having something that I have to change and migrate and constantly think about reorienting to fit with contemporary distribution or exhibition standards, like we did with Joyce at 34 with Sundance Now. I'm not a digital whiz. I don't even know. Like, that's why I have a really great Rolodex, so I can call up the labs who do know how to do this. But I've got the preservation negative. I don't even have to worry about it. I have that. Like, I send it off to the lab. Great. What do you want it at? I don't know. To talk, whatever the exhibition standard is, whatever they want it. Is that Laserdisc? Oh, it's a good thing it's not, right? How long was that around for? Betamax? We're on like even the digital tapes, like LTOs. LTO 10, LTO 8, which one? They're going so fast. I can't keep up. So I opt out, and I use the format that works for me now and will probably work for me in 40 years when I retire.
I've shown Joyce at 34 here at Stranger Than Fiction before, and it's a frustration to me that that it's a film I talk about and people don't know, or nor can they see it. So we haven't really announced this yet, but we've acquired it for Sundance Now's Doc Club, and we're going to put it out on Mother's Day or near Mother's Day. And this is, and the version that we're going to be putting out is a restored version, thanks to Elena's work at the New York Public Library. So, can you talk us through that project?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we ask ourselves is the material still relevant? Like, that's a silly question. Like, of course it is. Like, this is, maybe I think it actually even transcends being a woman or a mother. I think even our male partners feel it now. But that very special pressure to balance your family life with your professional life. Like, it's there, it's palpable, and right now there's kind of like a third wave feminism that's addressing that. So do we need to watch this film, Joyce at 34, where she very honestly discusses wanting to get back to work and how it's a real pain trying to edit this film with her baby, grabbing stuff. And then she talks to her mother and her mother's peers who were from the generation where they became teachers because that's what you could do. And they delayed their own professional development. One wanted to be a professional pianist. Well, now her son is the concert, clarinetist. So that, to me, that spoke to me personally. Like, I know, like, my mother was a teacher, and she could have been a great many things, but it worked to be a teacher.
So before we talk about what you did with this film,
Sure.
We have a 3-minute clip of the film, which is a sequence where Joyce is sitting around with this group of women, her mother's age, talking about the choices they had when they were in career. So if we can bring the lights down, we'll show this little clip from Joyce at 34.
I always felt that I had something to do, something to give, and that I wanted to give. And I wanted to do something that was worthwhile in this world.
It's my favorite. So we have to ask ourselves, like, should this be seen? Like, yes, I saw this film. When I first started working at the library, it was always on our list of, like, we must preserve Joyce at 34. When we got around to applying for funding from the National Film Preservation Foundation, I was pregnant and I was 34. And I used this as a handbook. Yes, I will be liberated. I will parent my child without guilt. This film, I really mean it when I say this is one of those movies that matters, and this really needs to be seen. Now, I really want people to see it as it was intended, which is in a small, educational, room with a projector in the middle, and then there's going to be a discussion afterwards. I recognize that that's not feasible for everyone, and maybe that's not the best plan. I want people to access this not for its content. I want them to feel it. I want them to ingest it. I want them to experience it. And I don't know that you can really experience it and get everything from it if you are just streaming it. I'm gonna go there and create this format hierarchy. For me, I'm talking about myself. For me, I know I've ruined a Charlie Chaplin film by watching it at home with the lights on, and I pause it for a snack, and I'm doing this. I'm answering the phone. It's like, oh man, I will just say I will not watch this film until I can see it in the theater. So this is the kind of thing where it's like, I want to give people the entire context. Like, let's have a discussion. Let's see it in the dark. Let's see it at 24 frames per second. Let's not do this to it. Let's do this. So that's what we preserved it for. And now we're really happy that, it's gonna get a wider audience, and people will get to experience the content. And then when they come to New York, they can come see me at the public library, and I'll give them the experience.
One big part of your initiative is this new IndieCollect index. And if you want to set that up more, go ahead.
Sure. Before I talk about the index, I just want to maybe do I have no mic. Hello? Oh, there we go. That's a little embarrassing, since I am the CTO of IndieCollect, but I can't run a microphone, apparently. Before I address the index, I just want to maybe do a quick counterpoint to the archivist perspective of film, because I do obviously have a great love of film, and that's what brings me to IndieCollect as a project. But my entire filmmaking experience is within the last 10 years, and so I certainly understand that there are a lot of trade-offs. I think a thing to remember about all formats is that every format has trade-offs and it has risks. And perhaps the most important thing is to make sure you're educated as to what those trade-offs and risks are of whatever format you're choosing, so you can mitigate those risk factors to the best of your ability, and you can make those trade-off decisions that best fit within your production and within your budget. And to address that, we do have a section on the website called The Digital Dilemma, which is named after the 2 papers that I believe the Academy produced that talks about some of those risk factors, so we can hopefully be a clearinghouse for this information for filmmakers so they can educate themselves as to these issues around digital formats, of which there are myriad.
Yeah, IndieCollect.org is your website.
Yes, IndieCollect.org. So to talk about the index, I don't want to repeat too much of what Sandra already said, but as the Duart Photochemical Lab closed in 2010, the Duart Labs had around 60,000 cans of films left, and Irwin Young, being the person who's dedicated to film and independent film, wanted to make sure that those films end up in the hands of the right archives and in the filmmakers and in the right place. So thankfully, to the vision of Sandra and her relationship with Duart, she was able to fundraise and take on the challenge of addressing this issue writ large, but specifically we started with the Duart vaults, and we started the process of identifying all of the elements that are, to the best of our ability, that are at the Duart vault, inviting representatives from lots of archives to come in and help identify these materials and say which ones they would be willing to find a home for, reach out to all the filmmakers so that they could be contacted and their voice can be heard as to what's going to happen to those materials. As we started IndieCollect, one of the things we really quickly realized is that a fundamental to executing on our mission and our vision was the need to document. We realized really quickly that anything we wanted to do, the first step would be to document independent film. So one of my first priorities was to develop a set of tools that would allow us to document independent film and the context that it needs to be documented, so that we can facilitate all the rest of the things that need to happen, like archiving elements, like making sure things are accessible and discoverable.
I love this idea of creating a network of labs, or where films might have been, because when I was tasked with preserving Joyce at 34, I had to find the originals. And I'll give you I gave Thom the entire story, but the short version is that I thought I had hit it out of the park when Joyce gave me an internegative. And I was like, yeah, my job here is done, high five, send it to the lab. And it's like, oh wait, internegative, like that's not a camera original. Like, what is this? 1981, that's not even the production date. This is from 10 years later. Like, what happened? She's like, oh yeah, the originals are lost. I'm like, what lab did you use? She's like, TVC. It's like, because TVC, their holdings went into a dumpster, maybe a proverbial dumpster, maybe a literal dumpster. Anthology got a lot of it. Cinema Arts got some of it. And all of this is kind of like you know it and you share it. Like, okay, if you want to know what happened to lab stuff, like I call Dennis Doros. Dennis knows where all the labs and the distributors went. So it's kind of like, oh yeah.
It's like a mob boss who knows where all the bodies are buried.
That's a really good, yeah.
And appropriately, he lives in New Jersey.
Yes, exactly. I love that title for him. So it's kind of like I have a Word doc, with like clip art on it, and it's very early 90s with like, this is the list of labs, and this is the rumors of where that stuff went. So it was like, okay, I'm going to call Anthology. And they're like, oh, you just missed it. We packed and palleted everything and sent it to Rick Prelinger. It's like, of course you did. Like, all roads lead to Rick. And he's like, sold the collection to Library of Congress. I'm like, just missed it by a week. And then everyone here has seen Indiana Jones, right? The Lost Ark. So like that last shot of the Ark going into the warehouse and the camera pulls back. Yeah, somewhere in there. On a bound pallet are the A and B originals of Joyce at 34.
You actually spent some time in the summer inside the Library of
I
Congress.
spent 3 years tracking this film and following it, and finally I was like, by golly, I will go down to Culpeper in July of all times. And I was like, opening up boxes. And I mean, it was cool. I found some test films or shots for Ira Wall's Best Boy, which was kind of like gratifying. But no Joyce at 34.
It's still in there somewhere.
It is in
and
there
the
somewhere.
restoration you did was off of Joyce's
Yeah.
deposit.
The archives have limited space. They also have limited manpower. And so whenever they receive materials, they need to inventory that and catalog those materials so they can find them, because they're not interested in having a Raiders of the Lost Ark situation either.
But also funds too to preserve that material. Because I just as a back, like 99% of the stuff that was in DuArt was all pre-print material. There were actually no prints, nothing you could actually put up and watch.
Correct, the vast
So
majority
to
of that.
take that material in for any archive was, dollar signs already, because we couldn't look at it unless we spent some money to actually make something out of it. So
Absolutely. And by documenting that material to the best of our ability, that really helps facilitate the process of an archive being able and willing to take that material on. The index strives sort of towards two goals. One is to be a bibliographic documentation, which is to say to record information about motion pictures and the people and organizations that are credited on those motion pictures. We also are seeking to facilitate this archival process to actually inventory elements of those motion pictures.
So eventually, each one of us as filmmakers will be able to go to the site ourselves and fill in as many of these columns as we can to put our films up there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this I've just happened to have bitter sugar up, so I'll talk about that one briefly and use this as a bit of an example. Though maybe I should find a better example that's more appropriate to documentaries. We'll go to Grey Gardens, which is in the index. So here we can keep track of the title and the alternate titles by which a film is known. As many people here would know, that films are known by multiple titles. So we want to be able to document all of those to ensure that these films are findable. We're tracking the copyright year and the release year of films, as well as a bunch of other technical information like the runtime and the medium in which it was finished, which really helps us make sure that we uniquely identify films and we know how to distinguish one film from another. So if they have the same title, we need to know that this film called Grey Gardens is actually Al Mazel's amazing documentary, and someone else might have also made a film named Grey Gardens. But by understanding technical information like runtime and the year, as well as credit information, that helps us make sure we are uniquely identifying feature films. We also link the index to external data sets to help give people us and other people give a richer understanding of what that film is, like IMDb, which we all use all the time, as well as the copyright registration database. So we can link films to their original copyright registration, which gives us some great information on researching them, the AFI catalog, as well as the IDER database, which IDER may be unfamiliar to many people. IDER is a new nonprofit that seeks to be a universal naming authority. So we want to make sure that independent films, as we document them, we contribute those independent films to the IDER data set. A lot of distributors are using IDER as their core data set to distribute films. We want to make sure that independent films are represented in that data set to help facilitate distribution and access of independent films. We also have the ability to track the people and the organizations that have credits on a given film, which helps us better understand what those films are and make sure we understand their uniqueness. It also helps us track down and do a lot of our research. As I already discussed, at DuArt, there's a lot of negatives, and we can't look at those negatives. And so we have to take little scraps of information and clues that we have about that film, and we have a great mystery, a great treasure hunt to identify that film. And so by any information that we can collect about a film will help us lead to more information about a film. For example, a copyright registration oftentimes has the production company that originally made the film, and that could be a great clue to help tracking down more information about what that film is and who we need to contact about the film, and just document it for anybody who's interested in it. Like we just talked about, we are also seeking to document elements and element sets. So I just pulled up a bunch of films that we documented at Warrington Hudlin's Black Filmmaker Foundation. He invited us in to help inventory his collection of films, and so we went in and documented all of the films that Warrington has, so that we, knowing that there's some very incredible films in there, and they may be the only existing copy of these films, and so we wanted to make sure that we documented all of those, and Warrington was a great partner with us and helping us get those documented. And that's really a lot of what we need. We need great partnerships with filmmakers who can help give us this information about these films so we can get them documented. And I'll apologize for saying this 10 more times before I'm done, because it's a really, really critical part of our mission, is that we need to get everything documented. I know Just Another Girl at the IRT, which is a film that you may be familiar with, was, oh, I think I misspelled that, didn't I? There we go. So Just Another Girl at the IRT is a film where we actually, the negative for that was in the Duart vaults, and we ended up, that went over to the Academy Film Archive. You can see here that we've documented the Academy Film Archive as the archive repository. We also now documented that Black Filmmaker Foundation actually has a tape copy of that film in their library. But by documenting all of these bits of information inside one data set, it allows us to draw those connections. So, once we find a film at the Black Filmmaker Foundation with the index, we would now know, okay, well, we've already found negatives for this film. These negatives are already archived at the Academy, so this film is at less risk than potentially another film. So it's really important to have one central data set that collects all of that information, so we can connect these dots and really have an understanding of what films are out there, what condition they're in, and what risk they may be at. So sometime this summer, we're going to let everybody on our mailing list know our beta is live, and we will encourage people to come log into the system and do their own searches of this data set and browse through the films that are in the index. Help look through that data set, tell us what you find, tell us what you don't find, tell us about your films that need to be added if they're not already in there. If your film is in there, the information's incomplete, tell us, or inaccurate, tell us what's inaccurate, tell us what's incomplete. Tell us what else we need to be tracking about films that you would be helpful to meet your mission, so we can take all of that feedback in and can continue to develop the index to make sure it's a useful resource going into the future.
I want to bring up Warrington Hudlin. Warrington, I'll just have you take the chair in the end. Warrington originally was going to be a speaker last night. He got called away to something else important. But Warrington has a long career as a filmmaker and as a founder of the Black Filmmaker Foundation that Israel was talking about. Warrington, if you could just tell us briefly what the Black Filmmaker Foundation is, and then I want to ask you about what your experience was working with this project.
Well, it started in 1978 at a time when there was no real awareness of African Americans making cinema. And so we decided that we could either protest and complain, or we could band together and be self-reliant. So New Day Films was the work they did with women films, really inspiration to us. So we began to distribute our films through Franklin Lakes Transit Media. And over time, we really began to build an audience. And also, we created, as a result of this organization, the first African-American Film Festival here in New York, which was 1979. And we just began to build audience. Later, another generation came behind us. A young man named Spike Lee walked in. He was still in film school. And we said, okay, we can support you. So we became his fiscal agent for She's Gotta Have It. So we really were the organization, the very early first generation support. And I have to take a moment to thank each of you, personally and institutionally. MoMA did something in the 70s that I'm forever grateful for. There was a man named Bill Gunn. He made a film called Ganja and Hess, which is, I think, one of the most brilliant movies of that era. And the financiers of that hated the movie, because it was an art movie and not a commercial exploitation movie, and they took the negative. He literally took the negative to MoMA as sanctuary. And for a long time, for a long time, nobody could see it unless you went to MoMA.
I want to say we preserved it through the Film Foundation. I don't know if Margaret's still here.
This is 70, so this is way back.
No, not, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
In the last 10 or 15 years, I think. It's been preserved.
Yeah, and my first film, my early films, was shown at MoMA and at Donnell. This again in the 70s. But Donnell did something more recently for me. I had a lot of my films stored at this storage house in New Jersey that had a flood. I can't think of the name. I'm blanking the name. I'm so angry at them.
Bonded, I bet. No,
Bonded. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bonded. And so anyway, so I got the call, and so Donnell accepted the mass shipment of all the prints and negatives, and ultimately came back to me, but that was a tremendous help. But what's happening now with Steve and Israel and Sandra Schoberg, who, by the way, I applaud her because her vision of inclusion has been from day one. When she created IFP, and this is 1979, she made sure that African Americans like myself, Latinos like Pablo Figueroa were involved, and now when IndieCollect came online, she again made that call. So I went to DuArt and with Steve, and we walked through the vaults, and I saw so many movies of people I knew. Unfortunately, many people made great movies, but they had passed away. You know, so we made phone calls and made those collections. BFF was actually one of our founding members was an archivist. And so he convinced me never to throw anything away. So for 30 years.
Good side and a bad side to that.
Oh, yeah. So Israel, I think we discovered, what, 700 different copies?
Yeah, there are about 716 films that you had.
Which I've been paying storage on. So when I got the call, and they came in and said, hey, we'll do this, I said, thank you.
So the question was, the index system you've created, is it based on other cataloging systems?
It's not directly based on other cataloging systems. We certainly talk to all of our archival partners to understand what systems they use and what their needs are, so we can meet those needs. Maybe referring to like Mavis, which is a popular one. The Academy, I believe, uses Mavis. UCLA has a custom-built system. So there are a lot of different systems out there, and we really wanted to focus on interoperability and make sure that our system could interoperate as well as possible with as many archives as possible. So that really led us down the path of creating a custom system that could be as agnostic and universally usable as possible.
That's a plus of FileMaker, right?
Yeah, that's a big plus of FileMaker. It's one of the reasons we decided to use that tool. Is you can develop very quickly, and it's extremely flexible.
I think one of the features that would be useful, although this information could be gathered through the existing interpersonal networks, is what has and what hasn't been preserved. I know that like Queens College was thinking like, oh, we're gonna like take our collection of educational films and we're gonna like make it an archive, and I was like, totally not necessary. Like, look at your collection, you know, it mirrors the academies and the New York Public Libraries. Like, a lot of stuff has already been preserved. So having a resource that people can go to just to kind of see, I guess, the state of the union of independent films, and to act as a clearinghouse. I have to figure out how this is probably gonna figure pretty heavily into my research scheme, and I have to just figure out how, in what ways, how extensively.
Yeah, I think I have to agree. I'm not sure I've wrapped my head around all of what it is. I'll just be honest. I've seen a lot of different kind of clearinghouse databases created. I'm looking at Dennis, who's familiar with Mike, which was a group, an EMEA thing about a huge database of all of everybody's film work, and it kind of fizzled. This kind of thing takes a lot of financial support and a lot of daily updating and really a lot of input. So I mean, I think it's a great idea for people to go to and see where things might be just as another resource, in addition to all the other things they might tap into as well, especially for like what's with all the DuArt material.
Yeah.
To just catalog all that, and then a place to go to be like, I think I left my film.
I was just gonna say, if it's a search engine for like, where's my film at? Like, if you're taking inventories of stuff cleared out of closed labs and uploading titles, I mean, that would be huge. That would be amazing.
Like, if somebody were to go back,
and all you would need is like film title off the can, you know, plus lab and its current location with like an inventory number, and the filmmaker can call you and be like, claim their film. That would be amazing.
Like if you were to go and find out all those people like Rick Pralinger, Dennis, Janice Allen from Cinema Arts, all these people that usurped a lot of those, that dumpster dived when things were thrown away and have created lists.
And Janice has, and
those
database.
lists could be put in there, then that would be extremely valuable.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're doing. So we've already imported the UCLA Sundance collection, and we worked with the Institute and with the UCLA archive, and we ingested all of that information into the index so that we have that. So that's absolutely one of our goals, especially this year, is to focus on those organizations that have data and to be able to ingest all that data so it all can be on one place. It could be cross-referenced and collated, so you can do one search and find the information you need.
I think that would be really invaluable if that, all that, because it seems like it comes up all the time, like, I had this film and I think it was here.
It used to be, I used to joke that like, if it wasn't the DuArt thing, before you guys like open up the vaults, I used to like have the vault manager, Angelo, was like on speed dial, because I was like, damn it, I bet they use DuArt, and like everything, it was a blessing and a curse, because on the one hand, I'd probably go 3 years trying to find a film just to find out that it was like 2 blocks away. Where's the curse in that? I forget. Anyways, but it was kind of like,
I'll throw out a challenge right here. For years, I've been talking to Laurie Anderson about trying to show Home of the Brave, a great music documentary she made in the 1980s. And Laurie said, I've got a laser disc of it. Can you show that? And she like really doesn't know, where anything is. I several years ago, I did kind of cursory search. I asked some people, and I didn't get anywhere. But there's a lot of smart people in this room with memories dating back to the 1980s. If you have any information about tracking down Israel, you're about to tell me you have it.
Well, I was
You
going to
found
say
it?
that we recognize that there are a lot of mysteries out there, and that's another challenge. We want to make sure the index is a tool to solve those mysteries by collecting those data points. So, for example, at the DuArt Vault, we found the negative for James Ivory's very first film, which is a documentary called Venice, Variations and Themes. And even James Ivory didn't know the negative existed anymore when we reached out to him, and he was very grateful that we found it.
When I went in there, the squid and the whale was sitting on the shelf.
Yeah.
I was like, this was shot on 16, and oh my God, it's right there.
Yeah.
So yeah, they're kind of like that. I wish someone would do like an oral history or something on that pervasive, transcendent relationship between a filmmaker and their lab, where it's like, I'm just gonna leave it there, it's good, it's cool, and then it's not. Or like even how you choose a lab. Like I know, speaking to filmmakers, they feel very passionately about Irwin Young, like very, very committed. And that almost inhibits the preservation process, because they will swear that no, I worked with the DuArt timer, like this film was perfect when I released it. And it's like, I gotta tell you, like the shots didn't match, and I preserved it the way it was made. Like it wasn't perfect, but I'm glad that your relationship was perfect with your lab. Or TVC, like, it's great learning. It's like, why did you use TVC? It's like, oh, they had a really lenient billing policy, So a lot of people use TVC. So that kind of history, like, I love getting those stories. And so, I keep it all up here. You just know, like, if something, if you were a filmmaker in New York, you gotta end up going down that road of trying to find it, if it was at TVC or DuArt or
Where one of the things we want to do is we want to establish a system where when we have these mysteries, that we could sort of send an APB out to the indie world and say, we need to know more about this, because we know the collective intelligence of the group and the collective knowledge of the group can be very useful. So we can have a mechanism to help solve these mysteries.
Yeah, we had to rescue. There's still a lot of material that, because some people have bought some of that material or took it from the dumpsters and kept it just for the very reason of holding it hostage, because we had to purchase, and we preserved right on, and we had to rescue the original negatives from Iron Mountain at a cost. They wouldn't give it to us until we paid a certain fee, because they had found it, and it was found, and they took it, and so fortunately found a donor to contribute that, but now it's preserved.
So the question is, amongst libraries and museums on a national level, how much are you guys working together?
So I would say is OCLC still, like, this thing was built, OCLC, that was supposedly going to link all of the library collections, and like you would put in a title and you would see all of the places. And that's I think it's a good case study in like what's required of something like this. Like, it's not accurate. It's not being updated. I don't know. I know the building of it actually extracts from existing catalogs.
And you actually have to be a willing contributor to that.
Yeah.
Like, I know a lot of people will never make their holdings public for various reasons, donor restrictions, blah, blah, blah. So like the Academy, you can't look up and see what they have. You have to actually talk to a person. MoMA, you'll never be able to see. You have to talk to a person.
But this is something actually that we've mentioned a couple of times. For those of you who don't know, the Association of Moving Image Archivists, AMIA, we're members. We got members all in the audience. We talked with ALA as late as last year about doing something like this, having an on the ground, getting like a big grant, and of course working with the Library Association. We have a lot of grants, big money grants available to us to put together like a core of on the ground people to go in and do an actual shelf checks. For me, I desperately want to just recreate the classic, like Jim Limbacher directory. It was like the 16mm film directory, and it was like these are all of the places that have like 16mm film collections. And I was like, I just want that updated. But we were also mindful of like, let's try to we were even thinking of a wiki. Like, let's do an educational film wiki, so crowdsourcing information, and then in that you could add things about variations on a title, anecdotal information about copies you might have in your collection. So there is a lot of idea about using these new collaborative tools that we have to facilitate and synthesize information.
We are also developing, along with the web app, we are developing a web-based API that will make all of this information accessible. I try not to get too technical, but they're going to be accessible as XML-based JSONs, which will allow anybody. We're going to publish and document this API, which means that anybody who wants to.
That's not too technical. We all know what that means.
Anybody can send out a structured request for this information and get structured results back. And what that will facilitate is lots of other people can start developing their own data sets that connect to our data set. They can develop their own applications that lean on the information in the index. Sort of the bottom line is we absolutely, our goal is for this to be open and for it to be accessible, and we are addressing that right now. So along with this beta of the web interface, we will also have a beta of this API, and we're going to work with strategic partners to help test that and make sure it meets their needs, and work with other similarly minded projects. And we're encouraging other people to use the information in the index, because the more it's used, the more eyeballs are on it, the more accurate and up-to-date it is. Like you said, a database is a living thing. It can't just be static. It can't just stop. And so we need people using the index, looking at that data, letting us know when it needs to be updated or it's inaccurate, so it can be a living organism.
Now that it's warming up, I can invite you to come to Lincoln Center to enjoy the tree grove and the flying lawn, and then you'll find yourself between the Vivian Beaumont Theater and the Metropolitan Opera House. You just come in and you say, I'd like to talk to someone about watching some films. You go to the second floor to the reference desk, and we'll guide you through the catalog. You fill out a request form, you get a library card, you tell us whether you want to check the film out, whether you want to see it on site, give us 3 days to get the film out of the vault in New Jersey, and then, just come watch films. If you get hung up on using the catalog, which is a little bit clunky, we're working on getting our film results to show up in the search better. I mean, we're very much like a humanist institution. Like, call me, email me, say, I'm doing research on this documentary I'm working on. Don't ask me to license footage. But say you want to do research, you want to watch films, you want to see what's been done, you want to revisit, blah, blah, blah. And I will come up with 6 or 7 titles. I'll come up with a whole list for you. So it's as easy as that. You just got to get on the subway and come up to Lincoln Center.
Warrington, the Black Filmmaker Foundation, what is it today, besides a now well-documented part of the IndieCollect Index?
We made an interesting pivot maybe almost 20 years ago. we start off by helping the new generation of filmmakers, but we realized that there's a generation that were successful, the Spike Lees of that generation, who still face obstacles. So we have this annual retreat, which is supported broadly by the industry, in which we gather, like last year we had in a row, they'd have CBS, NBC, HBO, and just people really talk about making America looks like America. That the people behind the camera, in front of the camera, looks like the streets of New York. And we're trying to make that case, and we're making some progress.
I want to thank you all for being here. So we're going to take a 20-minute break, and at 3:30, our last panel, best practices for digital archiving, or at least as best as we can come up with the people in this room. So stick around. Thank you very much to Warrington Hudlin, Israel Ehrisman, Katie Trainor, and Elena Rossi-Snook.